The snow began before dusk, a steady whisper against the roofs of Pine Hollow that no one paid much mind to at first. It thickened by the hour, erasing boot tracks and wagon ruts, turning the crooked town into a ghost's notion of itself. Lamps flickered behind frosted glass, and the last figures on the street bent into the wind, coats pulled tight, their words lost in the white hush that came down like judgment. Through that storm rode a man few dared speak to, Tahoma, the old Apache with hair the color of ash and shoulders still broad enough to block a doorway. He came on a black mare and led a chestnut gelding behind, the animals snorting steam into the air that turned to glitter in the lamplight. Every eye in the saloon window followed him, and somewhere a voice muttered, 60 winters and too stubborn to lie down in any of them. Laughter crackled like kindling. Tahoma heard it, gave no answer, only dismounted and tied his horses to the post outside the feed store. His coat was dusted with snow by the time he stepped inside, the bell over the door jingling like a warning. The storekeeper looked up, uneasy, but Tahoma's tone was quiet. 2 sacks of grain. Money hit the counter, silver, tarnished but real. The man hesitated before taking it, as if the coins might carry the memory of all the wrongs the town still whispered about. When Tahoma left, no one said thank you. They just watched the white-haired giant push back into the storm, a solitary shape swallowed by the wind. Across the street, beneath the inn's lantern, a young woman struggled with a trunk half her size. Her name was Eleanor. The light caught her face, pale from cold, lovely in the way of someone who never realized she was. The innkeeper's wife shouted from the doorway, voice sharp as sleet. "You'll not sleep under my roof again, not when you shame the place by being alone." The door slammed. A pail of ashes spilled from the threshold, mixing with snow around Eleanor's boots. She stood there too long, breath catching in little white clouds. Her husband had been dead a year. Work had been scarce, friends scarcer. Rumor had done the rest. She knelt beside the trunk, trying to drag it toward the wagon shed, the weight too much for her thin gloves. The wheel caught on a stone and broke loose with a splintering crack. For a moment she just stared at it, the sound of the wind swelling until it felt like laughter from every window around her. A shadow moved through the snow. Tahoma stopped beside the broken wagon without speaking. His hair was rimed with frost, his face a weathered cliff, expression unreadable. Eleanor's hand tightened on the wagon's edge. "I can manage," she said quickly, though her voice trembled with the cold. He nodded once, then crouched anyway. His gloved fingers examined the wheel, the axle, the broken pin. Without asking, he took a leather thong from his belt and began binding the fracture with calm precision. She watched the size of his hands, the quiet certainty of them, and felt some of the panic in her chest ease. "You don't have to," she whispered. "You looked cold," he answered simply. The words were not kindness spoken for comfort, but plain truth. When he finished, he straightened, joints creaking faintly. He untied the blanket from his saddle and held it out. She shook her head. "I'm not." "Take it." The tone allowed no pride. She hesitated, then reached out. The wool was heavy and warm, smelling faintly of smoke and horsehair. When their hands brushed, a spark of something unnamed passed between them, something older than either of their loneliness. From the saloon porch, laughter rose again. "Look there, she's caught herself a relic." Someone jeered. Eleanor flinched. Tahoma didn't turn his head. He only said, "Wind's turning north. Don't stay here." Then he walked toward the stable, boots leaving deep prints that filled quickly with snow. Eleanor wrapped the blanket tighter, humiliation prickling her skin. She wanted to cry, to shout that she wasn't what they said, but tears would freeze before they fell. She dragged the trunk to her wagon and climbed inside, breath trembling. Through the small window, she saw Tahoma leading his horses into the livery. The way he moved, slow, deliberate, unbent, stirred something half buried in her, a memory of men who kept their word even when the world stopped believing in it. The storm worsened through nightfall. The wind rattled the wagon walls like old bones. Around midnight, a knock came, one solid rap that startled her upright. She opened the door a crack. Tahoma stood there with a bundle of firewood balanced on one shoulder. "For the stove," he said. She tried to protest, but he was already gone into the white curtain outside. She fed the fire until the metal walls glowed faintly red, listening to the storm breathe around her. In the pause between gusts she imagined she could hear him, the rhythmic scrape of shovel or hoof, the endurance of someone who had long since learned that silence was safer than pleading. Morning brought pale light and cruel gossip. The street outside the wagon was pocked with prints, men stopping to stare, women whispering as they passed. "She's taken in with him," they said. "An old Indian ghost, living with that girl." Eleanor kept her head down and went to fetch water from the pump. Halfway there, she saw Tahoma at the trough, washing frost from his horse's manes. He glanced up, eyes the color of worn stone, and gave the smallest nod, a greeting, a reassurance, maybe both. She felt warmth rise to her face that had nothing to do with the weak sun. By noon, the innkeeper's wife came again, standing at a distance. "You'd best move that wagon off my land. You're making people talk." Eleanor's throat tightened. "There's nowhere else." "Then find a husband." The woman's eyes slid toward Tahoma's shape near the stable. "Though I'd choose one who can see over his own shadow." She left with a smirk. When she turned, Tahoma was closer than before, carrying a new wheel rim under his arm. "You'll need this soon," he said. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask." She wanted to tell him to stop helping, that kindness from a man like him would only ruin her further, but the words died. The truth was she didn't want him to stop. The truth was she had forgotten what it felt like for someone to stand near without taking. As twilight thickened, he built a small fire between their wagons. Snowflakes hissed as they touched the flames. Neither spoke. The sound of burning would fill the distance words could not. When the wind shifted, it carried the faint scent of cedar, and the ghosts of drums long gone. Eleanor's eyes lifted to his profile. Strong, solemn, carved by weather and patience. "Do you live far?" she asked softly. "By the creek. Cabin there." "Alone?" He looked into the fire. "Not always." Something in his tone hollowed her chest. She wanted to ask more but feared what the answer might awaken. Instead, she offered him half her bread. He accepted, broke it neatly in two again, and gave a piece back. The gesture felt sacred somehow. Old, wordless ceremony between the outcast and the hungry. When night settled fully, the town lamps flickered out one by one. Only the fire remained, a fragile star between them. Eleanor drew her blanket close, the same one he'd given her, and watched snow fall slow as breathing. "Why did you help me?" she asked at last, voice nearly lost to the wind. He didn't answer right away. The crackle of fire filled the pause. Then, low and steady, he said, "Because everyone else looked away." The words sank deep, heavier than pity, cleaner than charity. She studied him, the calm in his eyes, the white hair shining against the dark, and something inside her, brittle for years, began to thaw. A gust scattered the fire's ashes upward like stars. In their flicker she glimpsed what she could not yet name. Not salvation, but the faint outline of two lives about to turn toward one another. And when the wind died, only the whisper of snow remained, falling as if it would never stop. The days that followed blurred into white and silence. Snow rose past the wagon's wheels, crusted the roofs of Pine Hollow, and muffled every sound except the gossip that never slept. Rumors, unlike horses, did not tire in winter. They moved from hearth to hearth, soft-voiced and cruel, wrapping both her name and his in frost. "The widow's gone half wild with that old Apache. He sleeps outside her wagon. He feeds her like she's his squaw." The words reached Eleanor in fragments carried by the wind, yet each one seemed to find its mark. She stayed inside most days, mending what few clothes she had, listening to the stove crackle. But at dawn, the faint sound of footsteps always came, measured, certain, stopping by the door. When she opened it, she would find a neat pile of split firewood resting in the snow. Sometimes a small bundle of dried meat, sometimes nothing but a trail of large boot prints leading away toward the creek. No words. Just quiet mercy left at her threshold. One morning she caught him in the act. Tahoma was setting down another armload of wood, his breath rising like smoke in the pale light. "You shouldn't," she said softly. "They already talk enough." They talked before, he replied. They'll talk after. I don't want to cause you trouble. He looked at her then, eyes steady beneath his frost-white hair. Trouble finds me anyway. The simple truth of it silenced her. He turned to go, and she saw that he limped slightly, an old wound perhaps, hidden beneath the weight of dignity. When he reached the end of the lane, she whispered, "Thank you." The wind carried her words, uncertain if he heard. That night, the town's cruelty grew bolder. A drunken cowboy, face red from whiskey, staggered from the saloon toward her wagon. "Come out, pretty widow," he slurred. "Let's see if your Indian protector's as fierce as they say." The hinges rattled under his fists. Eleanor pressed herself against the far wall, heart hammering. Before she could cry out, a deeper voice cut through the storm. "Leave!" Tahoma stood between her wagon and the man, coat open, snow gathering on his shoulders. The drunk froze, then sneered. "Old man, you don't scare." He never finished. Tahoma stepped forward once, just once, and something in his eyes made the man's words die in his throat. He stumbled back, muttering, and disappeared into the snow. When dawn came, she found Tahoma sitting against the wagon's wheel, asleep upright, his hair rimmed with frost. He had kept watch through the night. She stood over him a long moment, then fetched the quilt from her bunk and laid it over his shoulders. He stirred but didn't wake, and she allowed herself a small, trembling smile. No one had ever guarded her before. By midday the storm eased. She ventured out with a tin pail, walking the narrow path toward the frozen creek. Behind her came the soft crunch of footsteps. Tahoma carried a pair of buckets balanced on a pole across his back. "Ice is thick," he said. "I'll cut through." They worked together in silence, his axe striking, her breath misting in the cold air. When the water finally filled their buckets, they started the slow walk home. Between them stretched a quiet that felt less like distance and more like safety. Days slipped past. She began leaving a plate of bread on his porch at dusk. By morning, it was gone. Sometimes a small carving, a bird, a horse, appeared in exchange, set neatly beside her wagon wheel. The gossip worsened with every act of kindness. The preacher's wife crossed the street to avoid her. The blacksmith laughed and said, "She's playing house with the tribe's ghost." Shame burned her, but beneath it grew something stubborn, an ember of defiance she hadn't known she possessed. Late one afternoon, she found him mending a broken bridle outside the stable. "You shouldn't give them reason," she said. The town needs reason like fire needs wood," he interrupted gently. "Without it, they'd grow cold." His voice carried no bitterness, only weariness. She realized then that he had lived half his life under judgment, and survived it simply by refusing to bend. Snow fell again that night. She sat by her small stove, listening to the world hush itself to sleep, when she heard distant voices through the storm. Two men near the fence line, their words cutting through the wind. "Sheriff says she can't stay there much longer. Good riddance. Maybe that old savage will take her with him when he goes." The laughter that followed felt like a knife drawn slow across her chest. She pressed her palms together, shaking. "Leave." The word repeated in her head like an echo she couldn't stop. At dawn she packed her things, 2 dresses, her sewing kit, a few coins, and stepped outside. The world was silver and silent. Tahoma was there already, stacking wood. He turned when she approached, saw the trunk at her feet. "Someone's been talking again," he said. "They want me gone. Then they'll be happy until they need something mended." His calmness startled her. "It's not your fight," she whispered. "It is if you freeze out there." She wanted to argue, to tell him she'd grown used to freezing. But the words wouldn't come. He looked at her long enough for the air to thicken between them. Then, without a word, he began hitching his horse to a sled. "We'll move your wagon near the creek," he said. "More shelter there." She followed, watching the strength in his hands, the quiet certainty of his movements. When the wagon finally creaked free from the snow, she climbed onto the bench beside him. The ride through the drifts was slow, the silence between them deep and strange, like standing inside a prayer. By the time they reached the creek, dusk had returned. He built a fire near the cabin's porch, and handed her a cup of boiled coffee. The warmth spread through her palms, chasing the ache from her fingers. "They'll think you took me in," she murmured. He stared into the fire. "Let them think what keeps them busy." The flames painted his face in gold and shadow. She studied him, the scars along his knuckles, the calm pulse of his breath, and felt the first true stillness she'd known in months. The storm no longer sounded cruel. It sounded alive, like something breathing with them. Later, when he rose to bank the fire, she found the courage that had hidden under fear for too long. "Tomorrow," she said, voice barely audible, "when we go into town, act like you're mine." The words hung in the air, fragile as snowflakes. For a moment he didn't move. Then he looked at her. Not surprised, not pitying, only steady. "If that's what you need," he said quietly. The fire popped, sending sparks upward into the falling snow. She felt her heart pound once, hard, as though it wanted to remember this sound forever. The moment before everything changed, before kindness turned to something braver. Outside, the wind carried faint laughter from the town, but it no longer pierced her. The firelight flickered across his white hair, across her trembling hands, binding them in an unspoken vow. And when the wind finally died, the only thing left moving was the snow, still falling, as if the sky itself refused to let go. Morning came pale and bitter, the kind of cold that made breath hang between two people like a fragile bridge. Eleanor woke before dawn, listening to the wind brush against the cabin walls, the faint creak of snow shifting on the roof. She almost thought she'd dreamed what she'd said the night before, but then she saw him, Tahoma, by the fire, mending the strap of her boot. The quiet focus in his hands made the memory real. She sat up, heart thudding. "You don't have to," she murmured. He didn't look up. "You asked me to act like you're mine. I'm only beginning." The words startled her, not for what they meant, but for how simply he said them, like truth had never needed ceremony. She watched the lines of his face in the firelight, every scar and crease a map of years spent surviving what others wouldn't understand. Outside, the storm had stilled into a clear, sharp morning. It was time to go into town. By the time they reached Pine Hollow, the sun had climbed halfway up the white hills, its glare off the snow blinding and hard. Eleanor walked beside him, her hand hooked lightly through his arm. The gesture burned her cheeks with a nervous flush, but she didn't let go. She could feel the gaze of every passerby slicing across their backs. The general store's door creaked open. Men stepped out, their laughter dying mid-breath. A boy dropped the sack he was carrying. The preacher's wife clutched her shawl tighter and crossed herself. The sheriff emerged from his office, adjusting his hat. He looked at them both for a long, unreadable moment before saying, "Morning, Tahoma." "Ma'am." His tone was stiff, cautious. Eleanor forced her voice steady. "Sheriff Walt, I'm here about the wagon plot behind the inn. You told Mrs. Dorr I had to leave unless I had family." "That's the law, ma'am." "Then you can write it down proper," she said, lifting her chin. "This man is my husband. I have family now." A silence fell that seemed to reach the edge of the frozen river. The sheriff's brow furrowed, his mouth twitching between disbelief and politeness. "Your husband?" "Yes." Her voice cracked, but she didn't falter. "Tahoma Greywolf." The old Apache inclined his head, the faintest nod, confirmation without performance. He didn't look at her. He looked at the sheriff, calm and unblinking. Something in that quiet gaze unsettled the man. "Well," the sheriff muttered, rubbing his neck, "I suppose that settles it. You can stay. Papers don't care for gossip." He tipped his hat and stepped aside. Eleanor let out a slow breath. Her hand slipped from Tahoma's arm only once they were past the crowd. The murmur behind them rose again like wind through brittle trees. She didn't dare meet his eyes until they reached the edge of town. "You didn't have to play along," she said softly. "I said I would," he answered. She searched his face, half expecting reproach or pity. Instead, there was only calm acceptance, something that made her feel both smaller and safer. At the general store, she bought flour, candles, a spool of thread. Tahoma paid before she could reach for her coins. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "I know." He gathered the parcels as if they weighed nothing. On their way out, a voice called from the porch. "Hey, old man, didn't know you traded hides for brides." Laughter burst behind them, sharp as broken glass. Eleanor froze, humiliated. Tahoma turned slightly, his profile carved against the bright snow, and said in a low, steady tone, "You speak of her again, and you'll eat those words like sand." The laughter withered. No one answered. They walked on. When they reached the outskirts, she stopped him. "You shouldn't have done that. They'll hate you more." "They hated me first," he said simply. Then, softer, "They'll learn to hate quieter." That evening, the sky turned copper, clouds glowing like slow fire. Inside the cabin, Tahoma set her parcels down and lit a lantern. She sat by the window, staring out at the snow, unable to still her trembling hands. "I didn't mean for this to go so far," she whispered. He knelt by the hearth, feeding the flame. "You meant to survive. That's never too far." The words reached something deep in her, some part that had forgotten how to be defended. She wanted to thank him, but gratitude felt too small for what stirred between them. When he stood, she saw the faint stiffness in his shoulder, the scar she hadn't noticed before where the cloth of his shirt pulled tight. He caught her looking. "Old wound," he said. "From the war. From people who thought they understood it." He smiled faintly, a crack of warmth across weathered stone. Later, they ate by the fire, stew thin but warm, bread torn between their hands. Snow brushed against the window like the touch of memory. Eleanor watched him in the lamplight, his white hair catching gold, his eyes softening when they met hers. She wondered if he ever tired of silence, or if it had become his only language. He noticed her gaze. "You're quiet," he said. "I keep thinking how strange it feels to be seen. Not as a burden. Not as something to fix." He tilted his head. "You see yourself fine." "Maybe. But it feels different when someone else does too." The room went still. Outside, the wind rose again, moaning through the pines. He reached for his coat. "I'll bring in more wood." His hand brushed hers as he passed, the briefest contact, but enough to stop her breath. When he returned, snow covered his shoulders. He closed the door, bolted it against the storm. "Won't last long," he murmured. "I don't mind storms," she said. "They make the world quiet enough to hear yourself think." He smiled, small, weary. "Then you hear ghosts too?" She studied him, realizing that maybe he lived with ghosts of his own. Friends gone, names buried under drifts of years. "What do they say to you?" She asked. "That the world doesn't end, it just grows quieter until someone listens." They sat again, closer this time, watching the flames dance. The silence between them no longer felt like distance but understanding, something alive and breathing. Her pulse thudded in her throat. "Tahoma," she whispered, "do you ever wish you'd been born somewhere else?" "No. Only wish I'd learned sooner that peace isn't a place." "Then what is it?" He looked at her gently. "It's when someone stops waiting for the world to love them, and lets one person do it instead." The words sank deep, warming places in her that had gone cold years ago. She didn't speak. She only reached out, almost without meaning to, and touched the back of his hand resting on the table. His fingers stilled. He didn't pull away. Outside, the wind began to cry around the corners of the cabin, but the firelight grew brighter, wrapping them in a cocoon of warmth and color. Time stretched thin, like breath on glass. She thought of how people would talk tomorrow, how their hatred would spread like frost, but none of it felt real here. Not with him sitting quietly beside her, his presence heavy with calm. She realized that asking him to act had brought something truer than play. It had made her braver. When she finally rose to leave for her wagon, he followed her to the door. "You don't need to walk me," she said. He nodded but didn't turn back. "I'll see you safe." They walked through the snow beneath a thin moon. The whole world seemed lit by silver breath. At her wagon, she turned. "They'll think worse of us tomorrow." "Then we'll wake anyway," he said. For a heartbeat they stood motionless, the air trembling with something unspoken. She looked up at him, white hair haloed by moonlight, eyes steady as winter sky, and whispered, "You make it too easy to believe the lie." He answered, Maybe it isn't one. Before she could reply, a distant shout echoed from town. A harsh male voice, angry, urgent. They both turned, seeing the faint glow of torches moving toward the edge of the hill. Tahoma's jaw tightened. "Go inside," he said quietly. Eleanor clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders, heart pounding. "What is it?" "Rumors," he said, voice low as thunder. "They've found something new to burn." The torches flared brighter against the snow. Between the gusts of wind came laughter, mean, reckless, and close. She met his eyes, fear rising. "They're coming here." He nodded once. "Let them." And in that moment, standing between her wagon and the endless white field, she realized that the man she'd asked to pretend might be the only one left who'd die for her truth. The firelight from town shimmered on the horizon, and the first spark of danger flickered in his calm gaze. Something fierce, protective, ancient. The wind rose again, carrying the sound of boots over snow. Eleanor whispered, barely breathing. "What will you do?" Tahoma's voice was steady as stone. "Act like I'm yours." The torches reached the edge of the trees before the moon could climb higher. Shadows moved behind the orange light. Men from town, faces flushed from whiskey and righteousness. Snow muffled their boots, but the wind carried their voices clear enough. "There he is," one called. "The old savage who thinks he can steal our women." Another laughed, too loud, too eager. Inside the cabin, Eleanor pressed against the window frame, breath shallow. Tahoma stood in the center of the room, his silhouette broad against the firelight. He had not touched his rifle. It hung on the wall where it always did. "You can't face them alone," she whispered. "I've been facing them alone since I was born." His tone was calm, not proud, not bitter, simply fact. The men's lanterns bobbed closer through the pines, throwing long streaks of light across the snow. Eleanor felt the air thicken with fear and something else, something older than hatred, the sound of history repeating itself under frozen stars. She touched his arm, fingers trembling. "If you go out there, they'll kill you." "Then stay behind me," he said. The door shuddered under the first blow. "Come out, Grey Wolf." A voice barked. "You've got 1 minute before we light it all." Tahoma moved forward, every step slow and deliberate. When he opened the door, the storm rushed in around him, scattering sparks from the hearth. He stood in the threshold, coat open, white hair catching the light like a halo. "What is it you want?" he asked. The man in front, Clyde, the rancher's son, lifted his rifle. "You took what wasn't yours." Tahoma's eyes didn't flicker. "I took nothing." She asked for kindness. "That's all." "Kindness?" Clyde spat into the snow. "You think we'll let some red ghost and a whore make a fool of us?" Eleanor flinched at the word. Before she could move, Tahoma stepped down from the porch. "If your pride needs blood, take mine," he said. "But she's done nothing." The wind snapped through the trees. The firelight made the barrels of their rifles gleam. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the sheriff's voice cut through the tension. "Hold your fire." Walt pushed through the crowd, his coat half-buttoned, face pale. "You boys gone mad? There's no crime here." Clyde snarled. "He stole cattle, Sheriff. Same one we found butchered by the creek." "I saw your cattle this morning," Walt said. "Alive. They wandered home." A murmur rippled through the men, unease replacing certainty. Tahoma didn't move. His breath rose in calm plumes. But Clyde's pride burned hotter than reason. "You always take their side," he spat, swinging his rifle. "Maybe you'll join him in the dirt." The crack split the night. The shot was wild, half-aimed, but fate never needs aim. Tahoma staggered, clutching his shoulder, crimson blooming through his coat. The sheriff struck Clyde's arm, sending the rifle into the snow. Shouts erupted. The men scattered in panic, leaving the smell of smoke and fear behind. Eleanor was already running. She caught Tahoma before he fell, his weight heavy against her. "No, no, no, stay with me," she whispered. He tried to speak, but the words came out as mist. She half-dragged, half-carried him back inside, slamming the door against the wind. His blood streaked the floorboards like spilled paint. She tore strips from her shawl, pressing them against the wound. "Don't close your eyes," she pleaded. "Not after everything." He smiled faintly, breath shallow. "You sound like my wife once did." Her throat tightened. "Then don't make me sound like a widow too." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters like an animal trying to get in. She worked in frantic silence, tying the cloth tight, lighting more candles. His eyes stayed on her, calm even through pain, as though he'd already forgiven the world. "Why do you care so much?" he murmured. "Because you're the only one who saw me," she said. "Not the lies they told, not what I've lost, just me." A flicker of warmth crossed his face, deeper than the fire's glow. "Then I'll stay," he whispered. "So you won't be alone in this cold world. Don't talk like you're leaving." "Hard not to," he said, voice dimming. "It's the only thing I've practiced." She pressed her forehead to his, tears spilling hot against his chilled skin. "Then practice staying," she whispered fiercely. "Stay for me." The hours crawled by. Dawn bled slowly into the snow, turning it rose-colored. When the sheriff returned, he found her still beside him, head bowed in exhaustion, Tahoma's hand resting weakly in hers. Walt hesitated at the door. "He'll live," he said quietly after checking the wound. "The bullet passed through." Eleanor's breath hitched in relief. "You're sure?" He nodded. "But he'll need rest, and someone to keep the fire going." He looked at her meaningfully, then turned to leave. "Town's ashamed if it matters. They know he saved that fool from freezing." When the door closed again, silence settled like prayer. Eleanor fed the fire, the flames licking higher until the shadows fled from the corners. She turned to find Tahoma awake, eyes glassy but alive. "You should hate this place," she said softly. "I did once. And now?" He looked toward the window where the snow still fell, soft as feathers. "Now I only see you." Her chest ached at the simplicity of it. She brushed a lock of his white hair from his brow. "You'll heal," she said. "Maybe." "You will. I won't let you go." He smiled faintly. "You already did the moment you called me yours." Outside, the sheriff's horse clopped away down the frozen path. The town would quiet soon, guilt heavy in its walls. But here in the small cabin by the creek, the world felt new. Two exiles bound by something that outlasted scorn. She sat beside him until he drifted into sleep, his hands still locked around hers. When evening came again, the snow stopped at last. A pale gold light spread over the hills, reflecting through the window, and bathing the room in a tender glow. Eleanor stood and opened the door. The cold hit her face, clean and sharp. The land was silent except for the creek whispering beneath its frozen skin. She stepped outside. The same red ribbon she once used to tie her hair now wound around her wrist. Carefully, she wrapped it around his arm where the bandage lay. "So you don't forget," she whispered. "You belong somewhere now." Behind her, Tahoma stirred. "What are you doing?" "Making sure the snow remembers us," she said. He smiled, the first real one she'd seen. "Then it will melt slower." She looked back toward the town, faint lights flickering in the distance, then to him, alive, scarred, and unyielding. "They'll talk again," she said. "Let them. And if they come back? Then they'll find me standing." She stepped closer, eyes shining with unshed tears. "You're not too old for me to love, Tahoma." The wind paused as if listening. His gaze softened, voice breaking just enough to sound human. "Then I'll grow older still, so you'll never be alone again." The last light of sunset flared behind him, catching in his white hair, haloing him in gold. She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his chest, and the fire inside the cabin roared brighter, as if it too refused to die. Outside, the snow began to fall once more, slow, steady, and gentle, as if the heavens themselves were bowing in silence to the truth of two souls who had finally found warmth.